Today's message is pretty simple. It is not until we fully love others that we will be able to fully love God. Now, I'm probably going to make that simple message way more complicated than it needs to be in the next few minutes. But I am in good company because Jesus took 4 chapters in John's Gospel to explain it. It's called the Farewell Discourse. And today's text falls right in the middle of that discourse. It may feel a bit odd to us that post-Easter, we are jumping back in time to the speech that Jesus gave the night before he was killed. But when you think about it, perhaps the people who created the lectionary, that is, those who picked specific texts for all the Sundays of the church year, perhaps they had a method to their madness. They seem to be drawing us to the very thing that we are often drawn to after someone we love dies. Their final words, their final days, their final actions. Or if it was not a sudden death, but perhaps an expected one, their legacy. Now, whether or not Jesus actually made this 4 chapters long speech all in one night before the crucifixion, or whether John was merely combining some of the greatest and lasting lessons that Jesus taught and was placing them around the pivotal moment of the Last Supper, we don't know. But the end result, regardless, is that Jesus' farewell discourse, as it's called, John chapters 14 through 17, contains it all. It's like the professor's last lecture of the semester, combined with the parents' words of warning as they hand the keys over to their teenager for that first drive, combined with the coach's pep talk before the big game, combined with the chaplain's words of comfort at the end of life. That is to say, it is an emotional roller coaster full of wisdom and warning both. Generally speaking, this discourse has 3 major components to it. And first is really that Jesus tells his disciples that he is going away. He is going to be with God the Father, but that they should not be afraid because he is sending the Spirit to be with them. He talks about the unity of the love between the Father and he and the Spirit, and he says, just as you see that love and that unity, that is how you are to be united and in love with others. And he reiterates this many times, saying, love one another as I have loved you. The second part of the discourse contains this allegory of the vine, which presupposes that, Jesus is the vine, the source of life for the world, and we, the disciples, are the branches. And he goes on to kind of fully explain what he means by discipleship. The vine emphasizes the love among the disciples, but Jesus talks about how important it is to stay connected to the vine because life will get hard. He says, if the world hates you, remember that they hated me before you. And in this world you will have trouble. But take heart. I overcame the world. You see, Jesus never said that life would be easy. In fact, multiple times he mentions just how hard life is. This is good for us all to remember when we suffer hard times, lest we believe that God is causing our hard times. No, hard times are truly just part of life, even and especially for those of us in the life of faith. And then the final part of the discourse is a really long prayer that Jesus gives, the longest prayer we have of his. And the key themes in that prayer are glorifying God the Father, and then a bunch of petitions and pleas for the unity of the disciples, Jesus prays to the Father that his followers may all be one as we are one, and that the love with which you love me may be in them and I in them. By the length of his prayer, it's almost as if Jesus is worried that we are going to struggle with this whole love one another thing. Essentially, he is saying, God loves you all, and God is with you. And you know this because I have been with you, and I love you, and I have shown you that love. You have seen it and experienced it, and so whether I'm physically with you or not, live like my love is alive, and it will always be alive. In the end, I imagine Jesus saying, after all the miracles and all the healings, after all the cryptic messages and all the scriptural interpretations, after all the dinners with sinners and the controversial conversations, after all the parables and preaching and prayers, after all the sowing of fields and fishing for people and multiplying loaves, in the end, all you need is love. Jesus said it before John Lennon did. But while needing love is one thing, abiding in love is a whole other reality. We all know that we need love and that we need to love. But needs can go fulfilled or unfulfilled. Abiding in love leaves no room for the theoretical. It's an action, not a wish or a desire. And to abide means to reside, to live, to remain. It is an all-encompassing, all-consuming term. You can't have one foot in and one foot out when you abide. You have to be in it 100%. There's such a drastic difference when you're, heck yeah, sign me up. I'm so excited. I'm in 100%. And sure, why not? I'll help you out if you need me to. That's the kind of halfway in that we sometimes give. Usually when you're all in with something, you're doing it because you want to do it. Something wells up within you and you're excited about it. But when you're only halfway in, chances are somebody probably asked you to do something, or maybe you feel obligated to do it for whatever reason. And it's pretty easy to tell the difference, right? We have a couple of great examples around here of people who are 100% in. Nadu Lawson, 100% in to our hospitality. Our coffee is hot, the napkins are out, the kitchen is clean and organized, a smile is on her face. Nadu is 100% in with hospitality. Bill Pinnickvar, 100% in to greeting and making sure guests are welcome, name tags are made, people are connected, and transportation is covered. And as for examples of people who aren't all in, I won't give you those. You can imagine them, your own. But I think of myself. Think of your own commitments, the ones that make you excited and the ones that you just do because you have to do. And it's okay to be halfway in to some things. A lot of life is like that. But the point of Jesus' message is that when it comes to God's love, there is no half in. Half is not an option, because God's love only knows how to function as being all in. God will always be loving us unconditionally and irrationally. This is the definition of grace, that we don't do anything to deserve God's love, we just have it. And that love will never be taken away from us no matter what we do. It is an irreversible love that makes no sense. And honestly, it can be downright frustrating if you're the type of person who likes to think that being good gives you an upper hand with God. But the reality is, whether criminal or Christian or both, God loves us all. But God's love can be present in our lives without us abiding in it, living in it. And I think Eugene Peterson makes the distinction nicely when in the Message, he translates verse 9 as, "Make yourself at home in God's love." Making ourselves at home implies time and effort and that we're going to stay a while. To receive God's love is just to be a branch attached to a tree trunk. To abide in God's love is to be a branch that is attached to a tree trunk that reaches all the way down to the roots, taking nutrients from the sun and water and soil and bearing fruit. Bearing fruit, Jesus says, is the distinguishing mark of one who has gone from receiving God's love to abiding in it or living in it. Bearing fruit is what shows that you're all in. And the fruit that he says we are to bear is how we keep God's commandments. And the commandments we are to keep is very simple, he says. Love God and love others. And in this section, he is really talking about loving others. It's almost comical in verse 17 how plainly he puts it. I'm giving you this command, love one another, so that you will love one another. As opposed to him saying, I'm giving you this command to love one another so that you can cross-stitch it on a pillow or put it on a bumper sticker or sing about it in a hymn. And we love one another not so that God can feel our love, but so that the world can feel our love and in turn, God's love. How we love others matters. Because how we love others reflects how others see God. How can God's love be known in a world where we talk about the niceties of love more than we actually practice the messiness of it? And when we do this, we're masking God's love rather than mirroring it. You know, there's a tradition, according to Zen masters, that talks about mirrors. The mirror, they say, is without ego and without mind. Everything is revealed in a mirror as it really is. There is no discrimination or judgment on the part of the mirror. If something comes before it, the mirror reflects it. If the object moves on, the mirror lets it move on. The mirror is always empty of itself and therefore able to receive the other. The mirror has no preconditions for entry or acceptance. It receives and reflects back what is before it. Nothing goes unseen before a mirror. If we are to be a continuation of God's way of seeing in the world, we must be mirrors. We must be able not only to reflect God's love, but to see others for themselves without projecting ourselves onto them. Because when we truly see another in all of their complexity, we are seeing Christ. And we are complex too. And so in all of your complexity, Christ is shining through you. And when we see people in this way, we're able to begin to really love God because we understand who God is. I like to think of it this way. What am I missing about who God is when I don't see someone? What am I missing when I don't see the Christ that's reflected in them, when I don't choose to stop and engage with them or speak with them? What am I missing about God? One of the most effective teachers of this seeing was liberation theologian and professor at Union Theological Seminary, Reverend Dr. James Cone, who died a week ago yesterday. Dr. Cone was a powerful and political voice throughout his 50-year career of being a professor and pastor, and he changed the landscape of theological discourse by insisting that we cannot address God without addressing justice claims, and we cannot know God without privileging the oppressed. His pastor at Riverside Baptist Church, Reverend Dr. Amy Butler, says, while Dr. Cone was always kind and open, he was also unrelenting. He was a lovely, gentle man, but he could get angry and agitated and could never fully comprehend how anyone could ever imagine a God who was not an advocate for the oppressed. He was famous for writing, "We must become black with God," which was not a comment on God's skin color, but rather on an unyielding declaration of the truth that God is always on the side of the oppressed. And so whoever is oppressed is who is reflecting God most fully to us in that time. His whole career was based on this, on helping us see those we did not or do not want to see. To join in this work is to realize that God is not made in our image. We are made in God's image, which means that each and every one of us reflects the divine and is worthy of divine love. So these are all the reasons that we choose to love others. As Benjamin Elijah Mays says, the love of God and the love of humanity are one love. The irony is, when we begin to love others, which pulls us out of our comfort zones, when we begin to see Christ in a new way, we actually begin to feel more deeply loved by God, I think, because we understand the depths of God's love for us. In reading about my sermon in the e-news this week, Calvary member and retired American Baptist pastor Glenn Hill sent me a quote from a favorite book of his by Rule Howe. The quote is this: "We are meant to be to our generation what Jesus was to his, an incarnation of the redemptive love of God." Glenn Hill wrote in the email saying, the challenge of those words stays with me to this day. In a sense, they have become my lodestar, my guiding star. I fail so many times to honor the admonition, but I have never questioned its veracity. For me, it encapsulates what Christian, i.e. Christ-like loving, is all about. So, I keep on trying, he writes. Glenn is 94 years old, and if he can keep on trying, I think we can too. And so we all keep on trying to be for our generation an incarnation of the redemptive love of God, just as Jesus was for his. We are all trying to make a living of loving. You have your own ways of doing this, I know. I see how you make a living of loving in and around this place and in our community. Here are some other ways you may not have thought of. We make a living of loving when we recognize that we don't have all the answers and we listen to another perspective. We make a living of loving when we set aside our concern of what other people think about us and put first the concerns of other people and what they think. We make a living of loving when we forgive ourselves for missing the mark in what we say or do, and for believing that we have a new opportunity to start over. We make a living of loving when we stop to give thanks every time we want to stop and complain. We make a living of loving when we lift up the gifts of others and use the gifts God has given us. We make a living of loving when we visit the home of someone who can't leave their home. We make a living of loving when we call out injustices with our voices and votes, instead of feeling resigned that nothing will change. We make a living of loving when we take care of ourselves as much as we take care of the ones in our families. We make a living of loving when we apologize and say, I messed up, and when we accept another's apology and say, I forgive you. And we make a living of loving when we choose to spend some of our precious time serving others who are precious to God, but whose lives, for whatever reason, might be in a precarious place right now. How do you make a living of loving? There is not any grand strategic plan that will tell you how to go about this. It comes one action, one person at a time. To make a living of loving, you don't need a college degree or even a high school diploma. You don't need previous experience or special skills. You just need an open heart and willing spirit to make a living of loving. And you'll never run out of things to do because the job will never be done, which means, hey, it's guaranteed employment, with the pay being a fuller appreciation of God and being an agent of God's kingdom. I know that this is not a new message today, that it's a simple sermon, really, to allow God to love you and for you to love others. The emphasis, I think, is that faith is relational because God came in human form, and we're called to be all in those relationships. Doesn't mean we'll get it 100% right 100% of the time. To make a living by loving is not to never mess up. It's not a state of perfection, it's a steady practice. We love over and over and over and over again, and in doing so, we learn what it means to really live. Love one another as I have loved you. These are words to live by, so much so that Jesus said them as he himself was dying. Love became his legacy because it was first and foremost his life. Will it be yours? Amen.